Hey everybody, this episode of Lionheart Radio is brought to you by the Endurance Hacker Society. That is a group of humans that are working to get stronger, to go faster, and to be able to go longer. If you are interested in being at the intersection of strength and endurance, then the Endurance Hacker Society is the place for you. For $49 a month, you get access to monthly programming. You also get 24/7 coach access, so if you have questions about how to implement it or why you're doing what you're doing. And then we also are going to send out monthly videos that are going to explain to you some of the protocols that we're doing, some of the science behind the protocols, and how best to implement it in your own life. You also get access to a library of guides. So if you're going to travel, we have travel training protocols on there. If you want to go do a marathon or a triathlon, we have race day prep guides. We have taper guides in order to make sure that you go into the race feeling as best as you can. You also get forum access so you can interact with everybody else in the Endurance Hacker community and be around like-minded people that are going through some of the same struggles. And lastly, you get 20% off the entire Lou Aviv and Lionheart Radio store. So that's supplements, apparel, whatever we sell. The Endurance Hacker Society is something I've been working on for a very long time, and I'm super excited to bring it to y'all because it is a curated economy where I know that everything that we bring into it is vetted based in science, and it's not going to be any kind of fluff or anything that's going to detract from you getting to the place that you want to be. What I will tell you is that the Endurance Hacker Society is not a templated program that you're going to be able to just put yourself on autopilot and go do. There are people that want that, but that is not going to be this. If you are looking for user-managed fitness program that's going to teach you how to implement it, why to implement it, and when to implement it on top of the programming, then this is the community for you. Go to louaviv.com, click on Endurance Hacker, and sign up today. Or shoot me an email, rick@louaviv.com. We can jump on a call, and I will let you know if this is a good program for you or not. And now, on to the show. All right, you're listening to Lionheart Radio with Rick Alexander, and today I am joined by Steve House, who is the co-founder of a company called Uphill Athlete, and essentially what they do is they focus all of their time on training athletes that find themselves in the hills. That can be, it seems like from the outside, that could be alpine climbing, that could be ultra endurance running. Is that pretty correct, Steve?
Yeah, that's right. Rick, we cover all this, basically what we call the mountain sports we love, which is, I would throw mountain running in there, mountaineering, rock and ice climbing, everything, all ski mountaineering racing. We deal with a lot of mountain athletes from a lot of different backgrounds.
And something that's actually seems to be something that's grown exponentially in the last few years with Kilian Jornet kind of becoming popular in a lot of the different mountain running type events. At least it's kind of popped up on my radar as of lately. Yeah,
it's exploding in popularity, and I think there's a lot of reasons for it. I mean, not the least of which is that it's really nice to be outside in the mountains, or in deserts and along the oceans and so forth. Running in the summers and for a lot of us skiing in the winters and so forth. So it's just a natural combination.
Yeah, that's a good point. I always try to figure out, try to ride that balance between running for training and then also just running for therapy.
Yeah. Well, the two don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Right. So what is it that kind of got you started out kind of as an athlete, as I understand it, as an athlete under one of the other co-founders, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I've been a professional mountain climber most of my life. I'm 47 years old now and still work for all my original sponsors. But in my about when I was 30, I had plateaued in my climbing, and at that same time, I was for the first time exposed to what I would consider truly world-class climbing partners, especially a couple of Europeans, particularly one Slovenian climber who I did an expedition with in Nepal, and we tried to climb a new route on the south face of Nuptse, which is a big mountain that sits next to Everest and Lhotse. And Marco is his name, Marco Prezel. He was just so much stronger than me. I kind of came back from that trip just sort of shaking my head like, wow, I thought I was good, until I roped up with this guy. And one of the things that came to mind first was, okay, I need to improve my training. At that time, I wasn't a professional in the sense, and really the sport didn't at that time have professionals in mountaineering that could make a living from sponsorship and climb and or train full time. That just didn't really exist. Right. It didn't exist in North America. And so I was working as a mountain guide, which was my original profession, and then trying to train in my spare time and realize, hey, it doesn't take much to put two and two together and figure out that I don't really know what I'm doing here. Maybe I can find a coach that can help me. And long story short, I went down a couple of blind alleys before finding my longtime coach and now, very close friend. And we've written a couple of books together, and we run this uphill athlete business together. His name is Scott Johnston.
And so what are we, a little bit pre-show, we talked about the book. What is the name of the book, and then kind of like what is that about?
Yeah, well, I'll just back up a tiny bit in that I wrote an autobiographical book about most of my climbs that was published in, 2009, I think. And at that time, I was kind of at the top of my climbing career. I was in my late 30s. I was, considered to be one of the best mountain climbers in the world. And so, the typical career step at that stage is to write a book. And when I was doing the tour, one of the single most common question I would get was, what do you do to train? And at that point, I had been working with Scott as my coach for 7 years. And my answer, people wanted a simple answer, like, I run, I ride my bike, I just climb all the time, whatever it is. But my stock answer became, I could tell you, but I'd have to write another book. Because, when you really have been doing this, during those years, I transitioned from, I think the sport matured to the point where I was able to make a living only climbing. And so I was just climbing and training. I'd eat, sleep, train, climb. That was it. And so it gets pretty complicated, like training full time for any developed sport. If you're trying to be the best in the world, that's really all you can do. So then fast forward to 2010, and I had a really bad accident. I fell about 25 meters, had 20 fractures in my ribs, almost died from a collapsed lung, broken pelvis, a lot of internal injuries. Oh, wow. Came out of the hospital 3 weeks later in a wheelchair, and began the process of rehabilitation. And Scott came to visit me, and a few months later, I was walking, not very well, but I was at least walking again and stuff, and kind of, wrapping my head around, at this point, like I was single. I didn't have really a career other than climbing. That had been my whole life, and now basically I couldn't do that, right? And so I said to Scott, like, hey, this would be a really good time to write that book we always talked about. And we originally envisioned like an ebook or a self-published thing that we would sell maybe 2,000 copies of or something. And last year we sold our 100,000th copy. Oh, wow. Dang. And we published it in 2015. It took us 3 years to write it. And then it came out in February 15, and it kind of it became adopted by a lot of people. Besides, the book is called Training for the New Alpinism, and alpinism is the sport of climbing mountains, with one other partner, typically on the most technically demanding routes, meaning hard rock climbing and ice climbing to big summits like in the Himalayas and so forth. And so alpinism, I think, is a kind of a pinnacle sport within mountain sports, and a lot of other mountain sport enthusiasts picked it up and started applying it for ski mountaineering racing, mountain running, because we spent a lot of time in the book, more than half of the book, teaching people the reasons behind training decisions, all the way down to the physiological level. Like, this is why you would do this, because this is the physiology that's going on. And on that level, everything's the same. It's an endurance sport.
Right.
And so we were able to explain that, I think, in a very good way. and people were able to take that knowledge and apply it to themselves in lots of different ways. And so it kind of created a life of its own, beyond just climbing. And from that is Uphill Athlete was born, because we were getting so many emails and requests for everything from coaching to training plans to just questions, people going about their own training. It started off as idea just to have a forum, like a place to, because people would ask basically the same questions.
Right.
So rather than write the same emails all the time, we thought, we just need to have a place to house all this. And so it sort of started off slowly that way. And then some of those questions require in-depth answers. And I think at this point we've been live for 13 months and we've got about 144 informational articles. There's a very active forum. There's new posts every day. I don't know how many posts there are in the forum, but there's a couple of thousand posts probably by now. And then to make this all work financially, we've written training plans that people can buy there, and we do coaching as well. Although that's a somewhat limited basis, because we require people to commit for at least 4 months and so forth, and not everyone's willing to do that. So that stays pretty small. But the training plans and the information that's there for free are the backbone of Uphill Athlete.
Right. So I'm intrigued by this because, of course, all of these are endurance sports, like you mentioned. But when you get into climbing, it seems like then you're really starting to work with upper body strength, the weight ratio. There are certain things that are going to be much more important than would be for just maybe a runner. Absolutely.
Yeah. And, from the coaching perspective, training a runner, or we also train like a lot of the people that are going to climb Everest. We're either providing a training plan somehow or coaching them. I mean, those are relatively straightforward to coach because they are lower. It's a bipedal endurance.
Right.
It's even simpler than like triathlon, where you're doing where you're having to do combined swim, run, and bike. So it's very simple. The hardest thing to coach people for is actually technical climbing, especially alpine climbing, alpinism, the kind of climbing I did, because you need this enormous aerobic base. You're operating at extremely high altitudes, typically above 18,000 feet, and you need to have a upper body strength. You need to have incredible endurance, because the climbs typically take, a short climb would be 4 or 5 days. A quick climb would be six days. So, it's these are kind of events that I don't think have any sort of parallel in anything I would call sport. It may be like adventure racing or something like that. But in alpine climbing, there is lethal risk that is not insignificant, so that makes the mental component very, very important, because you can't lose focus. You have to continuously make the right decisions and make the right judgment calls, because your life literally does depend on it. And so that as I referred to it before, I think it's a pinnacle sport, because it does involve everything that you can almost imagine. There's so many variables, and so many, and not only variables out of your control, but variables in your control. Yeah. And that's what we focus on.
Something you mentioned right there, which is the mental aspect. I'm wondering, when you're training a client to do something like climb Everest, obviously the mental component of something like that is not lost on probably anybody. I'm curious, do you have methods that are actually like meant to train the mental piece within what you do? Or is it kind of something where someone that's going to climb Everest probably already has that mental piece on lock, and then you're just helping them with the physical component?
Yeah, the question is, the answer is that it depends, of course.
Okay.
Some people need that. Some people have that, some people don't. And so, it's not, unfortunately, something that is easily prescribed, or to say, it's not like you can write these 10 steps and somebody just like follows these 10 steps and they'll have the mental strength to do a high altitude climb. So it really becomes individual. I like to start with two things. One, making sure people's goals align with their values, which is something I just wrote about over the New Year's for the website. And I think that that's a crucial step, because I think some people, especially when it comes to Everest, they're so enamored with the idea of Everest that they kind of aren't really thinking about what it is that they really care about.
Right. Yeah.
And really want to do. And so then, and it's a big process. It's a big commitment, not only financially, but also physically and mentally, and for the rest of the peers around you and family around you. So, there's that sort of starting step. And another big piece of it is just learning concentration, which is partially learned through the training process, but I also refer a lot of people to meditation techniques and so forth too.
Sure. So obviously when you're training the mountain piece, inherently that talks about, or that brings with it the idea that you need to train altitude as well. One of the things that I found out in the last ultra I ran, which was in Lake Tahoe, so I trained in Virginia Beach and then I went to Lake Tahoe to run this ultra. And the altitude was something that, although I knew it would slow me down, I kind of ran into some like high altitude pulmonary edema and some fluid problems. And I realized how that's just something it's hard to work around. So I'm curious, with when you are training people for these altitude sports, are there any interventions that you recommend, or do you have any opinions on things like interventions that are meant to help train you for altitude that aren't the real thing? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, there are things like these, the hypoxic tents and so forth. We have not found that those help most people. We have found that they help the pinnacle athletes achieve a 0.5% or 1% improvement. But the problem with things like hypoxic tent, sleeping in hypoxic tents and so forth, is that the tents do not change. So there's 21% air, 21% of the volume of air around us is oxygen, and most of the rest is nitrogen. And so what the tents do is they change that percentage. They remove oxygen and they re-inject more nitrogen. So you get down to, for example, like 10% oxygen and 90-ish% nitrogen is roughly corresponds to about 17,000 feet, which is almost 5,000 meters, which is sort of a typical benchmark for the beginnings of what I consider high altitude. And that is not the same as actually physically being at 5,000 meters or in this case 18,000 feet, where the pressure is, the molecules are further apart. Right. And so when you inhale them, the molecules are still further apart. The concentration of molecules has not changed. So the actual mechanism at the core of this is different. There are places, particularly in Olympic training centers around the world, because these are very expensive, there are places where they have rooms where they actually change the pressure, and even houses in some cases where they've like just completely sealed them and they actually can change the pressure. And the military uses things like this. A lot of well-funded Olympic teams have access to facilities like this, but that is beyond the reach of basically everybody else. Okay, so right. The only, what we always recommend, people are like living in Virginia Beach and running a race, in Tahoe, is to go out enough ahead of time to actually acclimatize the natural way, which is, as always, sort of the best way. It's, unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. There's no real good shortcuts. These things can help some people a little bit, but they're not panaceas.
Yeah, so that was kind of my follow-on question for people that are kind of living at sea level and looking to, even if they're not competing maybe in altitude, maybe they're just skiing in Colorado or whatever, are there ways that you recommend once you get there to acclimate faster, or is it really just a time game at that point?
No, there are ways, particularly to be smart about how you stress your body. So, for example, I live at 7,000 feet in Colorado, and I own a small guide service called Skyward Mountaineering. We take people backcountry skiing and climbing almost every single day. And when people come here to go climbing with with us, whether it's like right now it's ice climbing season, you know, we don't take them to the ice climbs at 10 or 11,000 feet the first day. That would be, you know, when they come, you know, so they fly in from sea level and they sleep at 7 or 8,000 feet, depending on where they are in the valley. And then the next day go up to 11,000 feet. When they come down that next night, they're going to be sick. I can almost guarantee you. And so we'll go to a climb that's, you know, near 8,000 feet, not much higher that first day. And you can typically handle an increase of, you know, most people can easily handle an increase of 1,000 feet a day. And a lot of people can handle 1,500 to 2,000 feet a day. Some of it is just comes down to, your genetics and how you adapt.
Yeah.
So, not stressing yourself more than that, good rule of thumb is 1,000 feet a day is a good way to approach that. So don't increase your altitude exposure more than 1,000 feet.
Right. Okay. So if you're physically active while at altitude, will that, and this is just something I read and I have no idea if it's true, but if you're physically active at altitude, will that force you to acclimate quicker? Like hiking?
To a point, but the mistake a lot of people make with that is they will exercise too hard, and then their body doesn't have any reserve left to kind of handle the adaptation process of acclimatization. So I always recommend to people. I mean, I've climbed Mount McKinley, the highest mountain in North America, something around 25 times. I lost track a long time ago. I've climbed, multiple. I've been over 8,000 meters. Peaks are the highest mountains in the world, and I've climbed multiple 8,000 meter peaks. I've been on 27 expeditions in the Himalaya, and if there was this was my career. If there was a shortcut, I would have found it. I tried everything. There was a while we were eating ginkgo. There was all these different things. Drugs we tried, whatever. None of it really helped. So the thing you have to do is stress your body appropriately and stress it being active, but not very active. So you're doing a hike, but you're not doing a run. You're doing a hike, but you're staying in zone 1. You're doing, you're keeping it easy in terms of what your heart rate is doing. Then you're coming back down, and then you're focusing on rest. You're eating, you're getting extra sleep, you're making sure you're hydrated, and that's how your body is gonna. It's a recovery. It's essentially a recovery process. Your body needs the stress. It needs to know that this is something you want it to do. But when you come back to camp or home or whatever, you need to also give it a chance to make the adaptations it needs to make.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. And you might have just answered my next question there, but so my next question was about supplementation. I've heard Viagra works. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, there are a number of drugs that help with altitude illness. Viagra being one of them because it increases the tension in the tension in the walls of the arteries, not just the arteries in the venous, but also in the arteries in your pulmonary system. So in the lungs, particularly. Viagra is a recognized treatment for pulmonary edema. And another drug that is well known for pulmonary edema is called nifedipine. Acute mountain sickness, the standard drug treatment is acetazolamide, sometimes called Diamox. And of course, the dosages and all that are another subject. And then there's also a very strong medicine, a steroidal anti-inflammatory called dexamethasone, which helps with acute mountain sickness and cerebral edema because it reduces the inflammation and the swelling of the brain that results from too fast of an ascent to high altitude. So all those things are helpful. My rule of thumb is if you have to take those, you're going down. Like those drugs are not like they're medicine. Like they're medicine for treating an illness. They're not a performance enhancer. If you're so sick that you need those, then you're done. Like you're not going to be able to do anything anyway. It's not something that really works prophylactically either. I'll be honest. Like we tried all that stuff. I mean, even my guiding days in the 90s, I used to guide multiple trips every season on Denali, and of course, we'd get these clients that were doctors, and they'd bring all these drugs, and we tried it on everybody. We tried all that stuff. It didn't make any difference. Of course, you have your anecdotal, somebody does well, but for everybody that did well, there's somebody else that did badly. And when I look back on all those expeditions, like it doesn't matter. What matters is proper acclimatization. One of the things that really helps with acclimatization is aerobic fitness, because your body just isn't as stressed, and it has more reserves for allowing you to adapt to high altitude.
Right. It's already moving more efficiently, so it can handle that better.
Yeah, think of it as fuel efficiency. The whole engine needs less fuel to do a lot of work when you're fit, and that means that there's a lot more capacity for it to acclimatize.
Right. At the beginning of this interview, you mentioned that when you had started out, it really wasn't a professional sport. And then as you get talking about your story, you say like, oh, I've climbed McKinley like 25 plus times. What is it that what drives you to even want to start climbing mountains in the first place?
I think it's like any sport, it's multiple things. I mean, part of it was the community I found myself in was when I started climbing mountains was a great group of people. So that made it fun. And then it just gets like, you get into it, and like, mountaineering is one of these, and alpine climbing especially, I think is one of these sports where you can literally do it a lot, like every day your whole life, and you can never learn everything. And any activity like that, whether it's an academic pursuit or a sport, I think those are the things that are just endlessly fascinating.
So it's just kind of that like desire to like, it always gives you the opportunity for progress almost.
Always gives you the opportunity for progress, new ways to test yourself, new places to to go, new places to see, new people to go climbing with and get to know. All those things are factors.
Yeah.
Also, I did a tremendous amount of traveling. Like I've been to Pakistan 12 times.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Like I would have never gone to Pakistan. and I mean, when I say Pakistan to people, like they have all kinds of images that come up with them, but it's also a gigantic country with almost 300 million people, and there's a lot of diversity there, and of course, I sure wouldn't want to live there, but there's a lot of really interesting places, and there's some incredible mountains in that country.
Right. I think that's one of the things that fascinates me about mountain climbing in the first place, is that like you get to see things that so many people in the world will never see, right? Whether that's traveling
Absolutely.
Or summits, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and especially the brand of climbing I did, where I was especially focused on in layman's terms, I would say I was mostly interested in the summits that were hardest to reach, because they were just difficult, just damn hard. And one of the misconception is that altitude alone is the only measure of that, and therefore everyone thinks Everest is something that's hard. And honestly, Everest is pretty easy. From my point of view, like Everest is not even interesting. I've never even considered going there because it's frankly kind of boring. It's a hike. It's not anything. I mean, I could go there and climb it in a couple of days. It's just not. And it's super crowded and dirty, and there's like all these weird politics, and it's incredibly expensive. And there are a million mountains that are more difficult than Mount Everest, and I can spend multiple lifetimes trying to climb those.
Right.
And that's where I've gone in my career as a mountaineer has always been to the back corners where very few people go, because we're searching for something different. We're searching for a place that a mountain that literally no one has ever set foot on, let alone, climbed this year. Right. We're looking for routes that are unknown, routes that nobody has established. Like we're making literally first ascents. We're literally the first person to step on this entire face of this giant mountain that, if it were not in the Himalaya, would be a world famous peak. But in the Himalaya, there's so many gigantic peaks that there's just almost endless.
Yeah, that's cool.
What you can do.
Yeah, what I'm like kind of hearing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like you can definitely tell. Like, I think if you want to climb Everest, it's like because you want the actual achievement of it, whereas like you're much more focused on the process and the experience and the journey of the whole thing.
Yeah, and frankly, like the achievement of Everest, what does it mean? It just means that you were one of 400 people to climb that season. Like, to me, that's not interesting.
Right.
Like, if I want to do something one of 400 people can climb, I can enter my local 5K. Like that's the way I see it. Like, I want to do something that nobody's ever done before. I don't want to go to the moon. I want to go to Mars. Like
Right.
that's what drives me as a climber. And so there's a big population of people who think like that in climbing, who are, working on the same thing. Basically, we're not interested in going to famous places that because people have heard of them. We're interested in going to places where a small number of people may have heard of them and nobody's been able to do it. And it's like the great problems of climbing, the great things to do.
Are you familiar with the Snowman Trek? You ever heard of that?
No.
In Bhutan? Okay. It came across my radar. I know that many more people have summited Everest and have actually finished this like kind of 17-day trek through Bhutan. So, yeah. Anyway, it just kind of jogged my memory of it.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not a very narrow field anymore. I mean, thousands of people have climbed Mount Everest now. It's like, I don't know. I don't want to. I'm not trying to demean the accomplishment or demean the people that have climbed Everest. It's just not that interesting. It's just not that hard. If you can climb, and all the guides say, if you can climb Mount McKinley, you can climb Mount Everest. And McKinley is probably harder because you don't have oxygen.
That's interesting.
When people, especially there are companies now that have developed new respirators for the oxygen bottles, oxygen delivery systems. I mean, you got to realize that most of these paying clients that go to something like Mount Everest, they're not carrying anything. The Sherpa is climbing in front of them with the oxygen tank. There's only a tube going to their mask, and they're getting so much oxygen delivered that in some cases it's like they're lower altitude than they can be in Colorado.
Right.
They're not at 29,000 feet. They're at 14,000 feet. Man, it's like flying a helicopter to the North Pole. It's like, okay, yeah, you've been to the North Pole, cool, but you rode in a helicopter. It's like you climbed Everest. Well, if you used oxygen, then you basically, in my book, you flew in a helicopter. You didn't do it under your own power. You did it by doping, and that's something I struggle with personally because I help a lot of people train for Mount Everest that will use oxygen.
Right.
And I'm really clear with them. Like, I don't have anything. I don't want to diminish their goal. That's a good, safe way for them to accomplish that goal. Mm-hmm. But there is no other way for them. They would never be able to have the skill, the time, and the talent to climb Everest without oxygen. So if they really want to do that, then that's the drug they need to allow themselves to do that. Then that's fine. I'll help them. I'll give them the training methods that we know work for mountaineering and for climbing any mountain, not to mention Mount Everest, and I'll help guide them along that path. That's my job. But personally, when people ask me why I've not climbed Mount Everest, it's just because it's not interesting. It's not hard.
Yeah, well, that is a really interesting take, actually. For people that are interested in climbing Everest, what I guess maybe if they're just coming from a basic level of fitness, and I'm not even sure if you can, put something like parameters on something like that, but how long do you typically tell people that they need to train for something like Everest?
We won't take anyone for less than 5 months, so 20 weeks. Typically, we want a minimum of 6 months and ideally a year.
Okay. It's about a year of like pretty dedicated work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's 6 days a week. Yeah.
When you're looking at all these different mountain athletes, what do you think that they do right that because a lot of people that listen to this show are probably, they're CrossFitters and they're powerlifters and, it's kind of a mixed bag. What do you see that mountain athletes get right that probably, the rest of us, other athletes could probably take away from what they're doing or what you're doing with your clients?
Well, I don't think mountain athletes are immune to any of the normal traps that all athletes, whether we're recreational sportsmen or professional athletes, are prone to. And that's, everybody's always looking for the silver bullet. Everybody's always looking for the shortcut. Everybody, at least in this culture, is short on time and has a lot of stress, and is working and has family and trying to do their sport and be fit or whatever. So wanting to know whether those shortcuts come in the form of a pill or come in the form of time, a time shortcut or some kind of easier way to get your workout in or whatever. We're prone to all those same things. So I think it's what all of us need to do, whatever our sport is, just understand that, I think the thing that gets lost on everybody is that people come along all the time selling some shortcut, selling some silver bullet. And the fact is that there just are not shortcuts. There are not silver bullets. We got to remember that, training for all these sports, whether it's weightlifting or wrestling or an endurance sport like running or cross-country skiing or swimming, these have been competitive sports, all of them, for 100 years at least. And everything has been tried.
Right.
And there are no stone has been left unturned. Especially when you look, talk about strength, when you go back to what the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc countries were trying back in the day with all kinds of, they tested every, they had essentially people that they could just tell them what to do. Right. They had almost, I don't want to use the word slaves, but they had so many athletes that were basically disposable that they could blow them up and they didn't care, because those people were assigned to be in the powerlifting development team for the Olympics, and there was 1,000 of them. And so if they blew up 999 of them and one of them won a medal, that was fine. And so they tried everything. And then when, the Soviet Union fell apart, like, the rest of the world got to learn about all of that. And so I think that we just all have to remember that there's some really basic fundamental truths to, whether it's strength training or endurance training, that at the end of the day aren't really that complicated, and just, we all collectively could just not be so distracted by the eternal quest for the magic potion, and just get in there and do the work every day. And It's not that there's no shortcuts. There's no, if there was, they would have been discovered.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's something that I always see, like, if it's a new fitness fad, right? I always look for, okay, is there an underlying linear progression here? Because if there isn't, then it really doesn't matter. It's not.
Then it really doesn't matter. That's right.
Right. In your bio, you guys have something written that says all training is exercise, but not all exercise is training. Is that kind of what you're referring to? Kind of that?
Well, it's what you just said. Like, there needs to be a progressive, there needs to be a direction to it. And we get a lot of people in the outdoor mountain sports community that exercise. They do something every day, but it's not cohesive. It's not put together with any logic behind it. It's random exercise. And, you can be healthy that way, but, you're probably not going to get fitter that way. You're probably just going to maintain whatever capacities you have.
Yeah. It's like random shit will get you to a point, but then that's it. And you won't progress after that.
Yep. Yeah. And that's just the way our bodies work. It's just the way our physiologies are. Our physiologies do not like to carry around capacities that they don't need. So my body doesn't need to be able to deadlift 3 times my body weight, it will shed that capacity in a hurry if I stop telling it that that's what I need to be able to do.
Yeah, that's a good point too, right? Like, it's not going to just adapt to stress it doesn't need to adapt to.
No, it's going to get rid of that stress as soon as to that capacity, as soon as that stress is not there.
Right.
That's what detraining is.
Right. So when we talk about adapting to stress, then do you have your runners and your endurance athletes in the gym?
We don't have a physical location. We do all our training, all our coaching remotely. Mm-hmm. But we do have, in that sense, we don't have them in our gym, but we do have them in the strength gym at least typically 2 days a week, unless it's a special case where we're working on something, whether that's either something structural or injury, or a really young athlete that just doesn't have the strength capacity to do their sport yet, something like that. But yeah, typically we do 2 days a week of strength training.
Okay, yeah, and then you find that's enough to get like the injury prevention and the underlying base strength that you need, and
yeah, for
not
most people
overkill.
it is. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. For most people, it is. It's a little more complicated with full body athletes, as you alluded to earlier, especially the rock climbers and ice climbers, especially if they're trying to combine that with some aerobic capacity. So, then those people may be essentially in the gym 4 days a week. But, that's, obviously it gets more complicated as the sport gets more complex.
Right, sure. Do you utilize gymnastics kind of like the Jim Jones approach?
What do you mean, the gymnastics or the Jim Jones? What do you?
So
you need to define your.
Okay, yeah. So, are you familiar with Jim Jones and the Mark Twain?
Yeah.
Okay.
I went to Jim Jones before it was Jim Jones.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
Mark Twight and I are old friends, and Lisa Twight and I know all those guys. And when the gym was originally created, in the upstairs, an abandoned room that had been a bakery at one point, it was just upstairs from a business that Mark had started that was distributing ice climbing equipment. And, I was one of his sponsored athletes, and this is going back to, I don't know, like 2001. And my coach, Scott, actually, I think Mark would agree, was very instrumental in helping Mark develop his philosophy about training, because my coach, Scott, actually had been already training and coaching for 30 years before Mark ever started. So he has a ton of knowledge and helped educate Mark in his philosophy. So I think that I would, what they have done with Jim Jones now is probably a little bit different, especially when Bobby Maximus came on the scene, and things after a couple of years started to shift away from the original philosophy. But I would say that with the original philosophy, at least, we were all on the same page. And originally, Mark was actually supposed to be a co-author with us on our Training for the New Alpinism book, but was unable to do so because of time constraints. But he did write I think, 11-page essay for the book called "There's No Such Thing as a Free Lunch," which has reached somewhat iconic status within the community. We call it TINSTAFL because that's the abbreviation of "There's No Such Thing as a Free Lunch."
Yeah.
Which goes back to Mark's, basically his story of going a little bit too far down the high intensity training rabbit hole in his pursuit of gains for endurance sport, particularly alpine climbing, and also later cycling, and then realizing he had to go back and rebuild his base.
Yeah, that's an interesting progression of anybody that stays with it long enough, I think.
Yeah.
As you age, you're like, oh shit, I skipped a lot of things there and I'm paying for it now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. So the final question is the Lionheart Kicker, and we try to ask every single guest, and it's based on advice. So if you could give blanket advice and it were guaranteed everybody in the world would hear it, and it can be based on climbing, based on training, kind of all the life experiences you've had up until this point, what would you tell people?
I didn't have any warning about this.
You know what, man? I'll tell you, I warned every single guest, and I just literally forgot to tell you.
Oh, good. Well, at least I get that caveat.
Yeah.
I think there's so many different little things. I don't know I have a cohesive answer for you, but, on one hand, I think something I say to my athletes a lot is that, the things that are hard, or, to put it more bluntly, the suffering is what forms us. And, as a society, we're always searching, seems like, for happiness and pleasure, but actually doing the things that are hard, that's what leads to personal growth and physical growth and spiritual growth. And I think that embracing that a little more culturally, if I was going to say something that every person in the world, I would say, doing the hard things, that's actually where it's at. That's actually the people that do the hardest things and do them well, those are the people I have the most respect for, and those are actually become the most evolved humans, frankly. And that's, I think, what we're all in this for, more than, setting some sort of PR. And that's one of the things I love about alpine climbing is there's no stopwatch, there's no scoreboard, there's no even competition or saying that one climber is quote unquote better than another climber, because everyone's on their own personal growth mission, and the ways in which we can grow as humans are almost limitless. I mean, physically and mentally, just those only start to scratch the surface. So
yeah,
that's what I would say.
That's really actually it's an interesting take, because summits it's used in conjunction as this like idea of success, and it's almost like what you're saying, like kind of you're so focused on it keeps you from being on this like hedonic treadmill where you're always just wanting more success and more things, and it's like, no, it's the journey, the suffering, the pain. It's all about just doing the work and kind of putting your head down and kind of just trying to grow as a human instead of just get something.
Absolutely. And if you want to get something, the best way to do that, I found, is to give something to someone else. Whether it is, I'm not talking about like if I want to get $20, I have to give $20 to somebody. It's like, if I want to give $20 to somebody, I better be able to give somebody some value. Like I better be able to give somebody some knowledge or a training plan or a lesson in how to ice climb or whatever that is. And the more valuable that gift that I can give them that's based on my own experience and learning is, then the more I'll get back, whether not, I mean, I'm not speaking only in financial terms either. It happens in many ways, those transactions. So.
Right. Yeah. It's like the human condition on some level is hardwired to just want to help other people going through the same kind of experience. Yeah. So for people that are listening to this and they want to follow along with you and kind of support the company and the things that you do, what are the best ways for them to do that?
Yeah, come and visit our website, uphillathlete.com, and we have a bunch of free information there. Join, participate, write a question in the forum, sign up for the newsletter if you're interested. We send out a new informational article every week. And yeah, join the movement. We're out there doing it and trying to bring proven training knowledge to this mountain sports community. Yeah. Love to have more people on the boat with us.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll double down on that too, because I was reading a lot of the website yesterday and I'm like, God, this whole website is just literally chock full of information. So if you're looking for training knowledge, that's a hell of a good like free start right there.
Great. Glad you found it. Good.
Yeah. Steve, thanks for being on today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, you're welcome, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Lionheart Radio. I hope that the information from today's show will make you fitter, happier, and healthier. For the show notes of this episode and every episode, head to www.lionheartrad.io. Yep, just like Lionheart Radio. And please, if you have the time, head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps us to know that we're on the right track and delivering you reliable information and value. As always, feedback is welcomed. If you have any comments on the show or would like to suggest a guest, send me an email at rick@luavive.com. That's LUAVIVE.com. Thanks for your support, and we will see you next time.
Bitch, I feel good. Don't I look stupendous? My shine is so endless, and shit you can do to end this. Even when I'm dead, niggas still gon' bump that chip shit. Coke, white, Escalade on cinches for you dipshit. So you won't forget this. Midwest nigga be the coldest. Cleveland is